Good evening, everybody. Congratulations on your new book.
Thank you, Dan.
Let's just start by talking about why this book. I know that's kind of like the cliche question that people in my chair like to ask, but it is a departure. You've done a lot of sort of lose all the fat on your body now type books, and your
Self-help books.
Self-help books. And now this is a deeply reported look at a systemic issue. So why?
Yeah, great question. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm a functional medicine doctor, and I look at things from a systems point of view, and I look at root causes. And I've been sitting in my office for 30 years, treating patient after patient with chronic illness that's mostly caused by food. And I felt like I was in a giant boat with a giant hole, and it was sinking, and I was just bailing with a Dixie cup. And I realized that I had to think about why my patients were eating the food they were eating. And the logical answer was the food system. And then I asked why the food system is the way it is, and it's our food policies. And then I asked why do we have our food policies, and it's the influence of the food industry on our policymakers and on everything that has to do with food, whether it's science and infiltrating science, public health groups, social advocacy groups, putting front groups out there. And they were literally controlling the way we grow food, the food we produce, the narrative around food, and it was producing food that's killing a ton of people. It's literally a holocaust of people every single year that die from eating ultra-processed food. I think that's conservative. It's 11 million people from ultra-processed food, which is what? It's ingredients of refined food from flour, sugar, and soybean oil that get turned into all manner of color of extruded food-like substances that are sold everywhere. And then I felt like if I had to sort of deal with my patients, I had to be basically a doctor to a bigger system and solve the problem at a bigger level and look deeply into why we have all these problems, what's causing them, and how to fix them.
We spent some time earlier today chatting, and we talked about.
I was on Dan's podcast.
Yes, check it out. Available
awesome.
Wherever you get your podcast.
10% Happier is a great podcast. And a few years ago, he did a segment with me. I think it was maybe for Nightline on my 10-day detox diet, and I wrote an inscription in the book for Dan. I said, if you follow this book, you'll be 10% healthier.
Then I had a child and started eating a lot of pretzels and ice cream. And not sleeping. I always tell this joke that after I wrote, the kid arrived after we had after I wrote the book, and which is about meditation, and I always tell this joke that the title of my next book is going to be "Everything in My Last Book Was Bullshit."
That's right. I'm no longer enlightened. I have a child.
Yes. That's a pretty good title, too. So we were talking about big food.
Yeah.
What is, when you talk about big food,
Yeah.
the food industry, what do you mean?
So it's not a monolithic thing, but it's the agriculture and food industry that I was shocked to discover is the biggest industry on the planet. It's a $15 trillion industry. It's 17% of the world's economy. Everyone eats. And it encompasses a number of different industries, including the seed companies that make seeds, and there's 60% of the seeds are controlled by 4 companies. It used to be hundreds. It's the fertilizer industry, which is massive, and we can talk about that later, but they are a massive industry. We produce 400 billion pounds of fertilizer every year that is causing massive destruction. It's the agricultural industry, which include the Bayer Monsantos, Cargill, Archer Daniel Midland crew, sort of big ag. And then there's the big food companies that are both the processed food companies and the fast food companies. So it's a few dozen CEOs that control pretty much the biggest industry on the planet and make decisions that affect every single one of us and actually everything that matters, everything from our health to our economy to climate change, the environment, children's academic performance, national security, social justice, all that's affected by our food in one way or another.
It's so, one of the great things about this book is you pick this lens, which is food, which is so, such a deeply ingrained part of our lives that we often overlook it as an important factor that's driving our society.
Yeah.
And you explain many of the most important aspects of our society through it. You just listed a bunch of them. So let's just go through some.
Yeah.
Climate, which is on people's minds, justifiably.
It's just weather. I don't know what people are all upset about.
It's easy to say that until the tornado hits your house.
This is true. So what's shocking and something I didn't realize is that the way we're growing food is actually threatening our ability to grow food in the future. It's threatening our food security here and globally. I don't know if you saw some of those images. It was a great image in Time magazine of a corn field and farms that were just flooded. And there was a corn silo that had just completely collapsed, and the corn was all over the place. And the very way we grow corn drives the instability in our climate that leads to those weather events. So the way that happens is that, and there are many aspects around climate and food, but part of the way that happens is the destruction of our soil through our farming techniques. And I'm not a farmer, I'm a doctor, but I actually did take a course in biological agriculture back in college. And I took a farm techniques course, which was essentially milking cows and driving tractors. I don't know why I took it. It was a 2-credit course, and I think I needed the credits. And I thought I might be a vet, but then I went into the vet barn and saw some guy with his arm in a giant plastic sleeve up to his armpit in a cow's butt. And I'm like, I don't think I'm going to do that.
It probably wasn't the butt either.
It was something, I don't know. It was very far up there, and he was all up in his neck, and I was like, no.
Anybody think that's what you're saying?
So the soil, it turns out, is the biggest carbon sink on the planet. In the way it holds carbon is through this ancient carbon capture technology called photosynthesis. And it basically sucks the carbon dioxide, which is what plants breathe, out of the air, puts it into the plant, down through the roots, into the soil, which then becomes full of carbon and carbon life and microbiology, because that feeds the microbes. And you create this wonderful circle of life where you have more, in a thimbleful of soil, you have more life than all the humans that ever lived on the planet. So it's an incredibly microbial rich thing, and it's incredibly full of life when it's treated properly. But the way we've farmed using tilling methods and chemicals destroys the life in the soil, and it causes erosion, and it causes the destruction of the organic matter. And a third of all the carbon in the atmosphere, which is 1 trillion tons, is from the soil loss. And we've lost over 1/3 of our soil since the Industrial Revolution, and the UN estimates we're going to lose all of it within 60 years, 60 harvests left. And that's terrifying to me, and it sort of is what sort of is also the solution. So the reverse part of that is that if you farm in a way that creates soil, which is called regenerative agriculture, you can reverse all that. And we talked about that earlier, but the UN has said that if we took 2 million of the 5 million hectares of degraded land around the world, degraded by overgrazing, by farming techniques. We used to, if you ever read *Sapiens*, it's an interesting book, because I always thought, indigenous humans and traditional culture was always good and they did good things. There's just us modern humans that were screwing things up. They were screwing things up back then, but they had so much land to move, but they'd create destruction on their land, and they'd move to another piece of land. We don't have anywhere to move anymore. So if they were to take those 2 million acres and create a regenerative agriculture system on those acres, it could stop climate change for 20 years, and all it would cost is less than we spend on Medicare for diabetes in this country in 1 year. So it's a totally doable thing, and I think so. In addition to the soil loss, we have deforestation from all the growing of crops or raising of cattle in factory farms. We have food waste, which is 40% of all the food that we grow is wasted. If it were a country, the greenhouse gases emitted when that food waste goes in landfills would be the 3rd largest emitter of greenhouse gases after the US and China. It's basically like every person in America throwing out a pound of food a day. It's $1,800 per family. And it's something we can do something about. and it is a big part of climate crisis. If we were also to look at other factors, it could be the factory farming of animals, which contribute probably about 14% of greenhouse gases, which should be banned. It's bad for them, bad for the animals, bad for humans. So fixing agriculture in a regenerative way has enormous impact. I met this guy, called him on the phone, Gabe Brown, who's a North Dakota farmer whose farm was completely destroyed by hail and bad weather and was about to go bankrupt. He had 5,000 acres in North Dakota, and he decided to try regenerative agriculture. He'd read about it a little bit, and not a kind of a hippy dippy guy. He's like a North Dakota farmer, and he, with a number of years, he was totally turned around his farm. He's produced 29 inches of topsoil on his farm, which is hard to do. It takes about 1,000 years to create 3 inches through traditional sort of natural processes, but by integrating animals into the farm and creating a robust, diverse ecosystem, he's able to create incredible amounts of soil, doesn't really need to irrigate, doesn't use chemicals. He said he makes his own fertilizer. The cows and the animals poo and pee and make their fertilizer. He said he makes better food, more food, and he makes 20 times the profit of his neighbor. And now there are companies like, investors like Farmland LP that are taking traditional farms, converting them to regenerative farms as a way of making money. So they literally go from single-digit profits to 60, 70% profits on these farms, and they do something called adding ecosystem services. So what that means is, around the world, we use up all these natural resources, and we're sort of rapacious. The amount we use is about $125 trillion a year, which, to put that in perspective, our entire global economy is about 80 or 90 trillion. And we don't put it back, and we keep using it up. Well, farming in this way actually adds benefit. It actually adds biodiversity. It restores the soil. It reduces water use. It actually helps improve the overall ecosystem. And they're called ecosystem services. And in many countries, farmers are being paid for these ecosystem services. So these regenerative farms that these investors are putting in, they actually add $21 million of value in this one project they were doing, whereas the same farms were taking out $8 million of resources from the earth. And now Danone, and why I'm hopeful is, it sounds terrible, but why I'm hopeful is companies like Danone and General Mills and Kellogg and other companies are actually investing in this. General Mills committed 1 million acres to regenerative ag. Danone is now putting their money where their mouth is. They are actually funding farmers to convert. They're figuring out mechanisms to pay farmers for ecosystem services, so making soil. So I think things are changing. It's been a really bad run. And it's not all these evil big food companies doing horrible things. It's the unintended consequences of good intentions after the war, World War II, to make a lot of calories for a hungry world in this fastest way possible. And that was done by the industrialization of agriculture, by the use of fertilizers and chemicals, by the processing of food for distribution and large amounts of starchy calories. And we didn't know that pesticides were bad. We didn't know that fertilizer was bad. We didn't know that these foods cause obesity and heart disease and kill 11 million people a year, right? We didn't know any of that. And so they're trying to sort of tack from this, legacy that's very difficult for these big companies, but they're trying.
On climate, given that so many of us are so worried about this, you talked about a lot of, I'm not a farmer. I'm not going to do any regenerative ag in the near future.
But you could put a garden on your rooftop in your apartment.
Yeah, or my cat shit all over the apartment.
That's not exactly regenerative farming.
Fair enough.
But,
Fair enough. And
that's terrible. Don't you have a litter?
Yeah, I do.
We have really nice cats. I don't know where you got your cats
No.
from. We don't do that.
No, they're terrible. If anybody wants a cat, I'll give you my email. Anyway.
Going back.
Glad my wife didn't come tonight because she'd be mad at me for
dissing your cats.
Yeah, besmirching their good name. Anyway, what can a normal person do? It's intriguing, the notion that our choices at mealtime could potentially have some sort of mitigating effect on this crisis.
Yeah.
Is that true? And if so, what can we do?
Yeah, it's true. So big picture, we need industry to change and we need government policy to change. And unless that really changes, it's going to be tough for the average person to take personal responsibility to make a difference. But our choices do drive policy. They do drive industry. And the example that we talked about earlier was that the Burger King just released an ad that was responding to a need in the market from consumers wanting cleaner food. And they basically had an ad of a big Whopper molding over 34 days until it turned to this disgusting, fuzzy, moldy thing in the commercial. And the song behind it was "What a Difference a Day Makes." It was great. And at the end, the tagline was, "There are no artificial ingredients," right? And I think, Kellogg's just announced a few weeks ago that they were going to get glyphosate, which is weed killer, that's the most abundant agricultural chemical used, that's linked to cancer and epigenetic changes and changes in the microbiome, to get it out of all their cereal. General Mills committed 1 million acres to regenerative ag, and they were called out because Cheerios had more glyphosate in it than vitamin D and vitamin B12, which they actually added to the cereal. So they were called out, and so consumers' choices matter. And I talk about this idea of becoming a regenitarian, which is, what is that? We need another diet philosophy? No. But it's aspirational. It's not possible now because there's not enough regenerative food, but if we can start with our wallet voting for people who are making and creating food that is done in a way that actually helps restore the environment, that helps solve these problems, produce better quality food, whether it's a community-supported agriculture, which you can buy, cheap organic food that gets delivered. You don't get to pick which vegetables you want. Whether it's, starting a little community garden, or whether it's choosing to find and source things like regeneratively raised beef, which we could talk about online. There's a website called Mariposa Ranch, which is a regeneratively raised farm you can buy direct from the ranchers. It's about $8 a pound, so it's not prohibitive. And for a 4-ounce serving, that's about $2, which is affordable for most people. And you can actually start to make choices that drive the marketplace. If everybody stopped buying processed ingredients in their food, it would drive huge change, right? Imagine if everybody boycotted all packaged processed ingredients that had any ingredients that you didn't recognize on the label, or that you couldn't pronounce, or that weren't in your cabinet. I think these are simple things that we can do, but it makes the market, and the market responds to it. And I think that's really exciting to me. The other thing you can do, it sounds kind of trite, but is the compost pile. Like, I've had a compost pile for 40 years. And yes, we live in New York City, but you actually can have a compost pile in New York City. You can get a little in-apartment composting machine. It's like a little barrel that's had a carbon filter, doesn't smell, and it makes compost, and then you can bring it to the farmer's market, or you can, like in Union Square in Brooklyn, I was talking to a friend, has it. And I think you can actually start to be part of the solution. And in my backyard in the Berkshires, we have a big compost thing I built with 2x4s. It's super cheap. I have a compost bucket under the sink. We fill it up, and now I have this most amazing compost that I have. So those things are things that we can do, and also we can vote in our communities. I think there's some incredible stories of people being activists in their communities. Like, school lunches are terrible, right? And they're being rolled back. Pizza, tomato sauce, and French fries are vegetables. They're counted as vegetables in school lunches. It's terrible. And the Trump administration just rolled back some of the Healthy, Hunger-Free Kids Act that Obama administration put in place to improve the quality of school lunches. But there's a woman in Boston who had children in school, and she was appalled by the food. And so she decided to do something about it, and she went to this one school and saw what they were doing. There were no real kitchens. There were deep fryers and microwaves. There was nowhere to cook food. There's only way to reheat the food. And she saw they were shipping in processed packaged food from out of state. And she said, look, why don't we build kitchens that actually work? And for reasonable price, she had some funds and was able to sort of do a demonstration project, created a cooking kitchens, hired the top chefs in Boston to make amazingly delicious recipes. They were within the school lunch guidelines, within the school lunch budget, which is not very much, that the kids would love, that they would eat, that they wouldn't waste, and that would help them improve their academic performance, their ability to pay attention, their cognitive function. And I think people don't realize how much food has a role in our brain. We see an epidemic of depression. We see conflict and violence. We see incredible amounts of challenges in our kids, academic performance and learning disabilities and ADD. These are in part related to the food we're eating, and it's possible to fix that. And they're seeing the results of doing that. You see these changes in these kids' function and brain. It's pretty impressive.
Let me just go back to climate for a second, because the stuff about kids is incredibly important. I don't want to overlook it. But on climate, you talked about not eating processed food, and that for me just provokes a certain amount of guilt, because who doesn't eat processed food? Who doesn't break open a bag of pretzels or whatever? It's easy, it's there, especially if you've got a kid, it's around. I mean, you've raised children. It's not. I mean, I have not had a lot of luck just making sure he eats, raw sweet potato all day. I mean,
yeah. Well, there were two things on the menu when my kids were little. There were
Yeah.
two things on the menu: take it or leave it. and I made my home a safe zone. Now I am who I am, so clearly I'm a little more strict. But they would go out into the world and they would find junk. And my son, in fact, gained once he left home, he gained about 100 pounds in college.
Wow.
Because his girlfriend was a feeder, bought him big sheets of Cinnabons and would cook them for him. So I think it is challenging to stay away from it because it's everywhere, right? We live in a food carnival. It's not a food desert, it's a food swamp. I mean, in New York, you have lots of great access to all things that many people in the country don't have. I've traveled all over the country, and it's really tough to find stuff that's edible in a lot of places in the country. It's not some canned green beans. I mean, I was in Iowa once doing something, and I was in the hotel and asked for some vegetables with my dinner, and they were like, yeah, okay, and they gave me canned green beans with brown sugar sauce on top, and it was the it was the worst. But you're right. I mean, it's not about guilt. It's not about feeling like you're wrong or doing the wrong thing. You just make incremental choices of what you can do, and the more you can nudge towards better choices for yourself, it's going to have impact globally. So we're eating for ourselves. We're also eating for what's happening in our society and for social justice and for the climate and environment and our economy. All that is connected, and I think that's an important insight. I don't people understand there's silos. Okay, there's social justice issues, there's kids and academic performance, there's national security, there's climate, there's chronic disease, there's Medicare, there's this. They're all connected in one way or another by food, some more than others. And I think by understanding that, we can design a strategy to start to attack this at a national, local level. And there are people doing this.
Let me ask about another thing that I think can do that might be beneficial, which has to do with meat. As you know, I'm a vegan, which I did only because I wanted to boost my self-righteousness quotient. Great.
How'd that work?
It's awesome. I'm 10 times more annoying than I used to be.
10 times or 10%?
Depends on the day. No, I did it a couple of years ago just because I started feeling bad for the animals. And they don't say thank you, as it turns out. And they will poop all over your apartment. So am I doing this just to preen, or does it have a...
is there value?
Is there value?
Yes. The answer is yes, there is value. I think that the unfortunate thing is that the argument gets polarized. If you're eating meat, you're destroying the world and you're destroying your health, and you're obviously hurting the animals. And if you're vegan, you're saving the world and perfecting your health and protecting the animals. It's not so simple. If you're a vegetarian, we talked about this. Studies have shown that just the act of agriculture is so inherently destructive because you're destroying the natural habitats of animals, moles, gophers, rabbits, birds, insects, and 7 billion animals die every year in plant agriculture. We kill about 29 million cows a year in America. So how do you value a cow differently than a mole or a rabbit or a bird? I don't know. So that's a sort of a meta argument. But the challenge is that the climate, there are three issues: moral, environmental, climate, and health. So we have to sort of separate them. From a moral point of view, if people have an issue, I don't have a problem. If there's my Buddhist monk patients, I don't make them eat meat. I don't think it's necessary. I think we can create a healthy vegan diet for people if it's designed properly. Chips and soda are also vegan. So, I think pretzels are also vegan. So that's not necessarily...
Cocaine, vegan.
Yes. Absolutely. Coca leaves. Chocolate's a good vegan food, though. And I think that from the point of view of health, and I've written a lot about this, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I think, the science is all over the place on this, and it depends which article you look at, who do you talk to, which scientists you talk to. But at the end of the day, there really has been a fair bit of good science that's showing it's either neutral or not harmful. Now, if you're eating meat in the context of an unhealthy diet, it's just bad. So a lot of the studies on meat that showed it was harmful were population studies, listen, you can't lock 10,000 people in a room or a house for 20 or 30 years and feed them a diet, another 10,000 people in another room and feed them a different diet and see what happens. That can't happen. So you have to sort of ask questions. Okay, what did you have for lunch last Thursday? What did you eat for breakfast last Tuesday? What did you have for dinner last Saturday? Nobody can answer that question, but that's what they do. They ask food frequency questionnaires, and people often underestimate the bad stuff and overestimate the good stuff. It's sort of what I learned in medical school. Whatever people tell you they're eating, it's twice as bad. However much people are telling you they're exercising, it's half as much. so I think that the science is clear. These are flawed ways of doing science and questions. So that is that problem. And then the ones that were eating meat in the ear of those studies had really bad habits, because meat was supposed to be bad for you. It was bad for your cholesterol, it was bad for your heart, so don't eat meat. So the people who ate meat, they weighed more, they smoked more, they ate 800 calories more a day, they had more sugar, processed food, they didn't exercise. So yeah, of course they had more disease. And if you look at health food store shoppers who were meat eaters versus vegetarians, both of their health risks were reduced and death reduced in half. So I think the health issue is a longer conversation. The environmental issue is important because we should all be eating a plant-rich diet for our health, not necessarily plant-based, and we should all be thinking about, what is the type of ways our food is grown. Because if you have industrially grown plants, like a GMO soy burger, for example, it's better than eating a factory farm burger, but it's still not the best thing, pouring tons of glyphosate, using lots of irrigation, having monocrop soy, tilling and erosion. It's really bad for the environment in many ways. So the solution is whether you're eating plants or animals, to eat more food from a regenerative system, which is not happening tomorrow, but given the way the food industry is acting around this, given the way that government policy is starting to shift towards this, it's going to be something we're going to be able to do. So I feel like, I think people have to make a personal choice about what they're doing, but I think it's not so simple as meat bad, vegan good, and that's all there is to it.
Sounds right. As it pertains to, we've been talking about the various sectors of society and issues that you've looked at through the lens of food, and we just dove in quite deeply into climate. But you also talk about social justice, and you touched on this a little bit as it pertains to children, but there's a lot to say here.
Yeah, on the social justice front, it's a big topic. Everything from poverty to criminal justice to kids and how we treat them, to minorities and health disparities. We're living in a country where it's essentially the developing world here in many parts of America, where life expectancy is 20 or 30 years less in areas of economic and social disparity. And the way in which these populations, particularly Hispanic and African American populations, who are far more affected by diabetes and obesity, they're maliciously targeted by the food industry. And this is not my opinion, this is based on credible data from Yale and other places, where they looked at sort of targeted marketing and the ways in which they infiltrate these communities, and the way they infiltrate their social groups. So for example, in New York City, and I don't think it was a good idea, but Michael Bloomberg decided to put a restriction on the size of sodas, or to put soda taxes on the ballot, or try to sort of move that direction. And he was highly opposed by the African American and Hispanic communities. Well, it turns out their NAACP and the Hispanic Federation are funded by the soda industry. And I think that there are examples of this everywhere. In Atlanta, where the King Center is, I was down there trying to show the movie Fed Up about obesity and the food industry about 6 years ago now, and I met Bernice King, who's Martin Luther King's daughter, and Martin Luther King said, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. And I'm like, okay, well, Bernice King is a daughter, and she was very excited about showing this and understood how her community was ravaged. As a Baltimore pastor, an African American pastor from Baltimore, says we're losing more people to sweets than the streets. And it's true, and gun violence is an issue, but when you think about how many Americans die from chronic disease caused by food, it's well over 1 million every year. And she said, I'd love to show the movie. And a few days later, I got a call saying we couldn't show the movie. I said, why? Because the King Center is funded by Coca-Cola. I went to the Spelman College and met with the dean there, where it's an African American women's college. She said one out of every two members of the freshman class suffer from a chronic disease, high blood pressure, obesity, diabetes. And I looked around the campus and there was just soda and Coca-Cola everywhere. And I said, why is that? She said, well, Coca-Cola is a big donor to the campus and our school. And one of the members of the board of trustees is a very top executive at Coca-Cola. So this is a way they sort of infiltrate it. And I think, I gave a talk a number of years ago about food oppression, and I'm not the first one to talk about it, but I gave it at the Harlem Riverside Church on the anniversary of Martin Luther King's assassination, and it was very moving, and it was a little nerve-wracking for me because I was this white Jewish guy talking in a African American church, and they were all really into what I was saying because they didn't really get how bad it is. So those are real issues, and I think they have to get solved. The other problem is, like you said, the injustice to our kids. I mean, if a foreign country was doing what we're doing to our kids, we'd go to war to fight them. 40% overweight, 1 in 10 kids have obesity, 1 in 3 kids born today will have diabetes in their lifetime, 4 in 10 teenage boys have pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes. I mean, when I was in medical school, they didn't have such a thing as type 2. It was called adult onset diabetes. They had to change the name because kids as young as 2 are getting adult onset diabetes. There are teenage kids who have liver failure from drinking soda and need liver transplants. This is a big thing. So so when we think about some of the challenges our kids are having, learning difficulties, trouble focusing, ADD, behavior problems, violence, suicide. Why are we seeing this? I mean, it's not just our digital media problem. And we were talking earlier that, if you look at a kid's brain who's eating processed food, their brains are 10% smaller and their IQs are 7 points lower. The CDC did a study looking at the way poor nutrition affects kids' brain function. They had poor attention, poor problem solving, poor ability to focus, more absenteeism, and more challenges with grades and performance. So, I mean, we know this is happening, but nobody's really addressing it, and which is sort of striking to me. It's, like I said, if we were seeing this kind of stuff done to our children from a foreign country, we'd go to war to fix it.
No, it's outrageous. What is the fix?
The food fix. That's the fix. Well, that's a great question. And, I wrote the book because I felt compelled to tell the story of how all this is connected and how through different avenues, citizens action, business innovation, and policy change and philanthropy, we could actually solve some of these problems. So in the book, there's a lot of solutions and actions, but they're just an intro. They're just a flavor of what could be done. And so I didn't know actually when I wrote the book that it would lead to this, but I was reached out to by this guy who helped launch the One campaign that Bono did, which was to help deal with AIDS and poverty in Africa. And they were able to, in a bipartisan way, figure out how to get Congress to appropriate $87 billion over a number of years for AIDS and poverty relief in Africa. And it was pretty striking. And so he reached out to me and said, we need to do this for food. And I think this is the time this has to happen. And they were all Republicans, and I'm not. And I was a little dubious, but they were really in integrity, and they really got it, and they read the book. I mean, one of the times he said, you have to be careful if you're channeling your inner Bernie Sanders on that thing. But it was really refreshing to hear. And we put together a nonprofit called the Food Fix Campaign and a lobby group called Food Fix Action to really go in with a broad coalition of stakeholders, put together a strategy that will drive the changes on a policy level that will make a difference. And I'm super excited about it. We've been meeting for days. So far we're raised money, although we're about to get some money in, but they're all volunteering, they're all coming together, and there's Democrats and Republicans. And Sam Cass, who was the senior advisor to Obama on nutrition policy, came to our meeting yesterday, and was shocked. He said, I've never seen Republicans and Democrats working together on anything like this. Susan McHugh was the chief of staff for the Senate Majority Leader in Congress, said, I've never experienced this in all my years in policy and politics and government. So I'm kind of excited about it. I think we're now in the development stage of figuring out what the strategies are and policies, but there's some real winnable wins, and there's ways to get things done in Washington that I was really dubious about given the way things are. But government is open, it's running, and there's mechanisms that are in there, the appropriations bill, the budget reconciliation process. These are hardwired things in the government that allow for things to be placed in there that don't need these big legislation like Affordable Care Act. And so there's all sorts of ways to fix the problem, and the government's starting to act. So I'm excited. I think the Trump administration put together a food waste initiative with the EPA, FDA, and the USDA to address the problem of food waste in the country, which I think is amazing. And there's local governments doing the same thing. For example, San Francisco put in mandatory composting. In Massachusetts, they passed a law that you can't throw out your food waste if you make more than a ton of food waste a week. And so business innovations start around that, and companies start creating solutions like anaerobic digesters, which take in food waste and manure from farms and create electricity for 1,500 homes and make the farmers $100,000 a year, solve the food waste problem, and help climate change in the process, and make energy, and everybody wins. And this is an incredible set of innovations that are happening. So I think if we can incentivize the right things, if we can de-incentivize the wrong things, if we can figure out how to navigate in a Machiavellian way the sort of halls of Washington and state and local governments, I think there's a lot of hope, and I think there is a lot of food fixes out there.
You were saying earlier that the book is called Food Fix, not Food Apocalypse for
That's
a
right.
reason.
That's right.
And so
it could be food apocalypse, but nobody would read it. but actually, I'm super hopeful. I actually, after talking to hundreds of scientists and policymakers and business leaders, I was sort of anti-big food, and I'm not for big food, but I've had a chance to be talking to CEOs of these big companies, to talking to the people who were running the show over there, and I recently met with this guy who was in charge of the meat business for Cargill, which is one of the biggest meat companies in the world, and he was interested, he was listening, he was willing to help, he got the issue. He sort of happened to be in the audience where I gave a talk about this, and I think, it was just, it's sort of a moment of hope for me, because I think this is something that everybody gets. It affects everybody. People can come together around it, and I think we can make a difference.
I hope you're right. I think we have some questions from the audience. If we don't, then I will. Oh, okay.
I think were there question cards we were going to get?
Yes, there are question cards coming up. While we wait for those,
let
me just ask you this, because you used a term in a conversation we were having earlier that I found to be really compelling, that I think is going to be of interest for these folks, which is food as medicine.
So one of the three key initiatives of this Food Fix campaign is infusing food as medicine into every aspect of policy and what we're doing, is reforming dysfunctional food policies and supporting regenerative ag. But what we don't understand, most of us, is that food is not just energy or fuel, that it's information, that it's instructions and code that regulates every single biological function, which is why food makes us sick and why food can heal us. And in the book I talk about this woman who, Janice, who came to see us at Cleveland Clinic, who was severely overweight, 243 pounds. She had type 2 diabetes, on insulin for 10 years. She had heart failure. Her kidneys were failing. Her liver was failing. She had high blood pressure, piles of meds, tons of expenses. And she was 66 years old on her way out. And we put her on a whole foods, anti-inflammatory, low starch and sugar, good fat diet, essentially what I write about in my books. It just is based on good science and common sense. And in 3 days, she was off her insulin. In 3 months, she was off all her medication and had lost 43 pounds and reversed everything. In a year, she lost 116 pounds. And she was headed for a heart failure. She was headed for a heart transplant and a kidney transplant. Now, just for those of you who aren't doctors, heart failure never reverses, it's managed. Kidney failure never reverses, it's managed. right? And so here you're seeing, how did this happen? It's because food is that powerful. It doesn't take years or months. It literally takes days and weeks to see the impact. And everybody can feel it. I mean, I joke, everybody has what I call FLC syndrome, which is when you feel like crap, you know? And there's a more serious form, FLS, which some people have. But it, you know, literally just shifting your diet for 10 days, that's why we're the 10-day detox, 10 days, you literally can see the connection between how you feel and what you eat. I mean, this one woman came up to me from the Daniel Plan, which was a faith-based wellness program that I wanted to call the Jewish Doctor's Guide to Christian Wellness. She came up to me after 3 days. She said, I've been in and out of psychiatric hospital my whole life. I've been on medications. I'm about to lose my job. My marriage is falling apart. I went on this program, and in 3 days, my depression went away. How is that possible? And I said, you know, it's not the case for everybody. It's going to happen like that, but food is that powerful.
I love it. So we have some great questions. The best of them is this one.
Uh-oh.
What should I order for dinner?
Okay, you should order a giant plate. Well, if you're at a restaurant, you should order 3 sides of vegetables. And you should order a probably appetizer portion of a regeneratively raised animal food if you're not vegan. You know, pasture-raised chicken, regenerative beef, or sustainably harvested or farmed fish. And you should, you know, maybe have a little chocolate after, and you should, you know, have some maybe sweet potato with it. Very simple food. It's delicious. You know, people think eating this way is bad, but you know, there's a friend of mine who has a joke. He says there's never a bad meal with Dr. Hyman. And I invite people all over all the time to my house. We had Christmas at my wife's house in New Zealand. And you know, Christmas is usually pretty indulgent. I made a very indulgent meal, but it was all delicious, healthy, whole foods. There was no starch, there was no sugar, there was no processed ingredients. It was just, you know, a leg of lamb. My wife has a very funny joke. She's like a comedian, and she has a great show called The Conscious-ish Show. We should all check it out. But she does this joke. She says, I'm from New Zealand. I came to America and we was talking about grass-fed beef. I'm like, I didn't understand. Like, what do they feed their cows here? You know, like they all eat grass over there. And she's like, well, I looked into it, and they feed them, you know, corn, and they feed them chicken poop, and they feed them, you know, candy like Skittles, and they feed them ground up animal parts. So I think we should just be honest if we're serving food at our house or a restaurant. Do you want beef or do you want shit-fed beef?
Not a choice I have to make anymore.
I've never seen you speechless, so that's impressive.
Which presidential candidate do you think would make the most positive change regarding food policy and the environment if elected?
Ones that are not currently running. Tim Ryan was one of the few guys who got this really well, and I'm doing an event with him in Washington on Monday called at 6 and I. And Cory Booker also seems to really understand these food and agriculture issues because he had a girlfriend who was super into this at one point, and other reasons. And I think, you know, I haven't heard anybody talk about the food thing, and that really disturbs me. They talk about Medicare for all, which I think is a universal right. We should all have a universal right to health care. But if we have Medicare for all, we're screwed because the economics don't work. Right now, 1 in 3 federal dollars is for Medicare, and soon it'll be, in 5 years, 1 in 2. Adding more people into the pot will only drive that up, and that will bankrupt our country. So we have to solve the problem of why people are getting sick in the first place, and that is the solution. And people are talking about climate change and fossil fuels. Nobody's really talking about how the food industry is 50% of our greenhouse gas emissions, and that we should focus on that. So I'm kind of disturbed by the conversation or lack thereof. And I did write the book in part now because I was hoping it would, you know, bring somebody to this conversation, and I hope it will. I still hope it will. So if you know any of the candidates, if you know how to get to them, get in the book. I'm going to give one to every member of Congress, thanks to my publisher, and hopefully all the presidential candidates. And I think, I don't know, I mean, I think, you know, Michael Bloomberg, I don't think is going to make it, but he does understand this deeply, and he cares about these issues deeply, and he has helped change policy in in Chile. In fact, he helped them lead an initiative through funding it, where Chile was able to create a widespread sweeping policy change that revolutionized food in Chile. So what they did was they basically needed a doctor in the Senate and a doctor as president to understand this, to make this happen. They put an 18% soda tax. They eliminated any cartoon characters from kids' food. They eliminated any food marketing in any media between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. if it was junk food. I think the broccoli ads were okay. and they eliminated any junk in schools. They eliminated any advertising for formula. And they put warning labels on the front of packages that had ingredients that were not healthy, whether it's sugar or processed food or salt or whatever. You could argue whether it's good or bad, but it's had enormous impact in reducing obesity, reducing the consumption of these foods, and he was heavily involved, and he put in $30 million, for example, to study the impact of that. So he does get it. Whoever is president is going to have to grapple with this, whether they like it or not. I just think the awareness level is so low. I was talking to this group from Washington, and they were speaking to a lot of staffers and members of Congress about this issue, sort of, pressure testing the ideas, and he thought the awareness would be like a 2 or 3. He says it's a 1. I was on a sailboat this summer with a member of Congress who was fairly progressive, a senator, and I kind of gave him the download. We had 2 hours on a sailboat, and he couldn't get away. So, I basically just started, and his jaw was hanging open, and he was just completely unaware, and he was inspired, and he wanted to help. So I think, it's a lot of education that has to happen. That's the first part of this campaign.
This one's from Carmela. How can I impact what my students eat? How can I help change the school food for the better in NYC Department of Education? Art teacher in PS 253Q. PS, I love your soul. I adore that little boy that loved all people.
Oh, thank you. What she's talking about is probably something I said on a podcast, which is when I was a little boy, and I think most people come to the world like this, they're full of love, and I just couldn't understand why the adults weren't all loving up on each other, and it just was a very disturbing moment in my life. I think I was 3. I'm like, what is wrong with all these grown-ups?
I remember watching my son when he was a toddler look out the window and say good morning to the entire Upper West Side.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So thank you for being a teacher. My mother was a teacher. She taught in Harlem, and we lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Queens, and she slept on the couch, and it's tough being a teacher. And I just and by the way, good news in New York. They just announced they were eliminating processed meat from all the schools, which is a good step. And I think hopefully we're going to have a mayor soon who's running that is going to be super into these issues. I've already given him the book, Zach Iskell. So I think hopefully he can be progressive. And New York is fairly progressive. There's a Tim Ryan's wife, Congressman Tim Ryan, who's running for president, is a 4th grade teacher in Ohio. And she basically created a rule in her class that the kids could bring in food to the classroom and eat it in class, but only if it was a fruit or a vegetable. And then this drove their kids, and this is a very, it was a very underserved area, it drove their kids to tell their parents to go buy them vegetables, bring it to class, so they could drink in class, but only if it was water, and they could go to the bathroom, and they could, and they talked about how to have clear urine and drink water, and then they had Fiber Fun Fridays, where they talked about fiber and their poop. And so there's things that teachers.
Poop has come up a lot tonight.
Yes, we talk a lot about poop. We even talk a lot about poop on your podcast.
Safe place.
So I think teachers can be very active. And the good news is, and I talk a lot about this in the book, there's all sorts of groups and organizations like Conscious Kitchens, for example, where they'll go into schools, they'll provide all the tools and resources on how to fix the schools and the school system. So, even working within the school federal lunch dietary guidelines and the federal budget, there are possible ways to change it, and I encourage you to check those out and check out the resources in my book and on my website, foodfixbook.com, where you can look at action guide and the kinds of things you can get involved in and do. So I really applaud you to think about this, because it's going to help your job as a teacher. Your kids are going to be less disruptive, pay more attention, and do better in school.
What apps are available that provide access to nutrition, health, and experts?
What apps are available? Well, Dan has a new app. What is it called?
We keep the branding pretty consistent, also called 10% Happier. Yeah.
All right, good. 10% Happier.
No nutrition
It's a meditation app. It's really good. And I think there's different apps out there that can help. The truth is, I'm not an app expert, so I can't really give an informed answer on that. So, good luck.
Given that financially secure consumers who live in areas with good food access and are educated on these issues are a minority in the U.S. and globally,
yes.
How do we create an economic system that makes quality/sustainable food more profitable than the alternative?
You're right. I think that's an important question. And in the book, the first chapter of the book, I go through what is the true cost of food. Because the price we pay at the checkout counter is not the true cost of food, right? Just take corn, for example. The government pays through taxpayer dollars to help grow corn through crop insurance and other price supports. That way we grow corn destroys the environment, kills biodiversity. For example, just one example is fertilizer runs off into the rivers in the Mississippi, down in the Gulf of Mexico, and kills 212,000 metric tons of fish every year. Who's paying for that? What's the cost of that? Then the food gets turned into high fructose corn syrup and all sorts of ingredients for processed food that then get fed to people, which is 60% of our calories. Then the government, through our food stamp program, which is important for food insecurity and is a great advance in helping the poor, has no discrimination about what you can buy, unlike other food programs like school lunches or women, infants, and children's program, which there are guidelines. And then we pay for $7 billion worth of soda, 30 billion servings a year for the poor. And then we pay for Medicare and Medicaid on the back end. So the taxpayer is paying 4 times for the food, and the government is bearing the burden, and we basically privatize the profits to the food industry and we socialize the costs. So the true price of a regeneratively raised burger should be $2 and a feedlot burger should be maybe $100. And that ain't happening anytime soon, but that's how it should be. So given that it's challenging for people on low budgets to eat well, there are ways to do it. And I'm on the board of the Environmental Working Group, and there's a great guide called Good Food on a Tight Budget. And just an example of what actually could be done with people who don't have the means that we do necessarily here. I was part of that movie Fed Up. I went to Easley, South Carolina. Family of 5, lived in a trailer on food stamps and disability. The father was 42, on dialysis already from kidney failure from diabetes. They were desperate to get healthy. They didn't know what to do. They weren't educated about the right information. They were basically being fed by the food industry. What is diet this and diet that? And I went to their home, taught them how to cook one meal, and they only had processed food in their house. They never cooked. They never learned how to cook. And they lived in one of the worst food deserts in America. I showed them how to cook. We made turkey chili, a salad with olive oil and vinegar dressing, and roasted sweet potatoes, and stir-fried asparagus, just simple things. And I said, "This is how you cook," which is all it took, one lesson. The family lost 200 pounds in the first year. The son lost 50 initially, then went to work at Bojangles, which he said was like putting an alcoholic to work in a bar. and then he gained all the weight back, but eventually he lost 138 pounds. And now is in medical school. And he asked me to write a letter of recommendation for medical school. So even in the worst place, and people who don't have the means, it's possible with the right education and the right help. And I think we're doing this in Cleveland as part of the work I'm doing at Cleveland Clinic. And I just see how hungry these people literally are for the right information and the right food.
Thank you for your work. Thank you for the book. Congratulations.
Thank you.
There will be a book signing somewhere. I don't know where, but assuming when you find means of egress, there will be a book signing there.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming, everybody, and congratulations again.
Thanks, Dan. And thank Dan. Thanks, Dan, for being so awesome.